Hi friends, my name is host Eric. I'm the host of Talking with Famous People, and today I'd like to talk to you about taxonomies, models, cognitive functions, and present a couple of analogs here that I think will perhaps help clarify what cognitive functions is. Okay, and the basic concept here at the top that I note is I'm using breathing and talking as things that one might treat equivalently in terms of taxonomy in them to exemplify experience and communication. So let's start with the breathing part. So let's pretend that instead of having cognitive function types, we had breathing types. We still need to define what a breathing type is. A breathing type would have to be a distinct configuration that represents a strategy to attain body oxygenation. Okay? So in other words, anytime you want to define type, you need to have it be an expression in some regard that represents one of more than one possible strategies. When we talk about it in terms of animals and ecosystems, we might say, well, this bird with a very long beak is specialized to exploit this particular resource in the ecosystem that's otherwise unexploited by other people or other organisms, and it gives them along with the affording them this advantage, it comes with some limitations necessarily, right? Okay, so if we were going to talk about it in terms of we're going to talk about breathing types, we'd have to imagine a different world first and foremost, where the atmosphere is more variable than it is here on Earth, okay? So we're imagining a place where here on Earth we have, up the top of the mountains, we've got thin air, but it's very rare. There are places on Earth that are so high that the air is so thin that you can't breathe, and there are other reasons why you don't want to go there anyway, so it's not particularly relevant to us, right? But if we imagine a world in which varying pockets of area are of lower or higher oxygen content, include more or less other gases that aren't necessarily good, then we create a situation where we might have an equivalent when it comes to breathing. And then we'd say you've got active, inactive, frequency, magnitude, lungs, O2, and responsive or efficient as your vectors, basically. What does that mean? Well, first of all, let's look at the real-time breathing statuses. So from an experiential level, you've got two real-time breathing statuses. Either you're fine or you need to breathe harder, catch your breath right now. If it's the latter case, there's four possible reasons why that might be true. You've got a problem with access. Gas can't reach the lungs, like a airway obstruction. You've got a problem with productivity. Breathing doesn't result in enough O2 entering the lungs. That'd be something like COPD. You've got a problem with transport. The heart somehow isn't pumping oxygenated blood to all parts of the body well enough. And so you feel lightheaded or tingly foot, bad circulation kind of thing might be considered part of a breathing problem, even though it, I guess, might be called something else. Or you've got a problem with the raw materials. The wrong kind of gas is being processed. So when I do nitrous, whippets hits, and then after I've held a couple of men, I go, I gotta breathe really hard, right? Okay. It's not because I didn't have adequate amount of gas in my lungs, it's because it was not the kind of gas that I needed to breathe. Right? Cross-time statuses, explanations of these real-time deviations. So, in other words, to categorize these kinds of things, we can categorize them as this first one is an unmet nib, which is a necessary but insufficient burden. Having an unobstructed airway is a necessary but insufficient burden to getting breath into your lungs. 2 and 3 are both structural failures of some sort, right? So if either your lungs don't work well enough or your heart doesn't work well enough, basically hardware problems. And then C, circumstantial failure. Well, that just means that even though there's nothing wrong with your breathing and there's nothing, all the necessary burdens to getting air into your lungs are met, you're not breathing the right kind of gas, so it's not going to oxygenate your blood. Then if we talk about these in terms of static breathing statuses of deviations as attributes, then we'd say if you are first and foremost fine, then we just say unnotable. There'd be no notation needed for a breathing status. Normal, you might say. And then if you have a problem with catching your breath, it might be a periodic problem like asthma, might be a chronic problem like COPD, might be a circumstantial inadequacy like not enough oxygen in the air, or it might be a circumstantial advantage, very oxygen-rich air. So when we talk about these statuses, then periodic and chronic problems, we afford these statuses to the individual whose breathing we're talking about. When we're dealing with circumstantial inadequacy or circumstantial advantage, we're talking about realities outside of the individual being the deciding factor on the breathing matter. 4, vectors linking to both kinds of status. So ultimately, you're talking about frequency of breath, depth of breath, efficiency of gas extraction, and quality of resources. Okay? And what this means here, in terms of the types, is going to be addressed on this page a bit. So let's say we're going to ask, well, what kind of breather are you? We're going to be test to find out what kind of breather you are for like a personality test. I take lots of breaths, so I don't need to breathe deeply. I just put a couple like cognitive functions thinking. Like that would be like FE above NI in the analog. The analog doesn't break down all that far, but I take deep breaths, so I don't take many. This is like a deliberation action approach versus an interface knowledge approach, right? Quantity of breath versus quality. I extract all the oxygen, none wasted, so I can breathe thin, clean air. Or I extract some O2 from air, but I have to sift through dirty air. Like expert intuition, it expects to process a lot of stuff, toss aside the useless stuff. So it's got to be robust in terms of tolerating failure, I guess. And the breathing analogy, that would be air that's got smoke in it or whatever. Or it'd be an advantage, like I breathe better because I'm a Sherpa and I live up in the Himalayas, and so yeah. Okay, I go long stretches holding my breath, so I don't need to extract O2 quickly. Or I expect to never need to hold my breath, therefore I must surface regularly. This should say, so I don't need to re-up O2 quickly, okay? Let's put that re-up. Hi, darling.
Hi, handsome.
So this would be like a marine mammal versus a land mammal, right? I need to breathe rarely. Could also correlate with low activity level. So it could be that the blood of the marine mammal just is more effective at using every bit of oxygen. Or it could be that the marine mammal is less active, therefore needs to use less oxygen. So we have activity level, but we also have sort of the mechanical effectiveness of the system that it utilizes the oxygen while the being is living. Like, it's basically like fuel efficiency in a car, right? So what things can we measure directly or indirectly? We could measure lung capacity directly, but it's more useful or more meaningful as a measurement when it's comparative than when it's just raw, right? Shortness of breath, real-time vectors. It could be a matter of whether you're cardioing or resting, right? Or it could be a matter of process problems. If you always have shortness of breath, then maybe you've got bad circulation, or maybe you've got COPD or something like that. Shortness of breath, static vectors. It could be that you're the reason you're short of breath is because you're way up high or underwater. Or it could be the reason you're short of breath is because compared to other people, you can't run as far before you get winded. Measurement vectors. Empirics reported experience as per blood oxygenation level to gasping for breath. So if you wanted to measure empirically the effectiveness of somebody's usage of oxygen, you would see how quickly the linkage between the blood oxygenation level decreasing and the increasing need for breath. So if you imagine somebody jogging, as they're gasping for breath, the reason they're gasping for breath is because the level of oxygen in their blood has gotten too low and their body is demanding more oxygen. Okay, so empirics, environmental factors. It could be inhaled this mold, then couldn't breathe, right? So we can see how if we were to taxonomy breathing in this fashion, this would be a kind of taxonomy in which we're saying the reason that creatures that breathe very rapidly take more shallow breaths is because lungs process the gas out of the air faster than breathing in full. In other words, I'm faster at breathing the first part of my breath than the rest of the breath, and the lungs operate faster than the muscles operate. So I'm most maximally efficient at breathing shallow if I want to maximally attain the amount of oxygen my body is receiving ultimately. In other words, more shallow breaths will oxygenate better than fewer deep breaths. Okay, so the thing is, we don't live in a world where we have human beings having different breathing configurations because there's not need to have, there's no, the system of air attainment isn't complex enough to require multiple configural strategies in order to ensure sufficient diversity within a given species, okay? So, okay, can you wait until I'm done with this video to continue making noise, please? Thanks. Because there's been a lot of background noise. And I was watching the stream last night, and it was really annoying when you were opening the packages and stuff. Okay. Fuck. All right, let's talk about this. I guess maybe I'll just try to edit out that part in the middle there. But anyway, here we go. So let's talk about taxonomy and communication now. Ways people express a concept. If you were going to taxonomy how we can think about communication, you might say people convey things on vectors. We can measure their conveyance on vectors of concision, on vectors of inclusion, on vectors of purpose, or on illocutionary vectors. So concision means more clear, less thorough, or the opposite, more thorough, less clear. Now that doesn't mean you can be both brief and unclear. It's certainly possible, but regardless, you are including the vector of concision regardless of the clarity, okay? Clarity is a separate vector, really, and that would be determined more by the reader, I guess, than by the expressor, right? Inclusion, more particular claims are more universally inclusive. So if I say, I really enjoyed that movie, it doesn't threaten anybody because it's not saying, it's not making a claim that requires you to agree or disagree with it. And more universal claims are less universally inclusive. So if I say that movie is good, now that's less inclusive because you might not agree with me, at which point you have to decide whether you want to openly disagree or or just not say anything. Whereas if they had said, I like that movie a lot, nobody has to worry about that because there's nothing to disagree with. It's all subjective claims on subjective particulars claims, which therefore are inclusive in the sense that they don't create barriers between mutuality. Then also regarding inclusion, this is where the clarity thing kind of comes in, which is things that are more parsed say less, and things that are less parsed say more, which is, if I'm being very exacting in my language, I'm including some disclaimers, limiters, careful definitions. I'm limiting the scope of the ground that my claim is trying to seize. On the other hand, if I'm using FI, I'm doing less parsing to say more. I'm trying to express something that doesn't break down into words very easily, but I want to convey to you what I was experiencing in a way that you can resonate with. So I'm trying to say more, but I'm being less precise. Purpose: descriptive, convey experience. Prescriptive, promote an action. Normative, promote a frame. Predictive, promote an impact. So descriptive expressions are just statements that say, this is a gray lighter, or that movie is good. Okay. Prescriptive are those that promote an action. You should take 2 Tylenol if you have a headache. Or, normative, those that promote a frame. It's not appropriate to discuss politics at Thanksgiving dinner. Would actually be a normative claim. Although we normally think of them as more like, it's wicked to steal. Predictive is simply that if is usually used to promote an impact, which is used as a way to incentivize people to affirm a given action, this perspective. So it's like, well, why should I invest in Mia? Well, because if you do, in 2 years from now, you'll be filthy rich. That's basically predictive claim that's promoting the truth of a claim about an impact yet to happen in order to promote an action. 4, illocutionary vectors. So the other thing to consider when you're dealing with a statement is there's the matter of why the person, explicitly why the person said the statement, and then really why the person said the statement. So to consider that second question, you need to consider the issues of advocacy. So maybe the person passionately believes in something, and so is definitely a team player on team, let's say, on team carbon tax. So in that factor, you got to remember that they're attached to their group's agenda in this instance, and they're not going to be engaging with you in dialectic. You got to take a rhetorical approach. Ego. Some people have their ego attached to their claims, and they see their identity as comprising some of the things they say as far as beliefs are and such. And those people, you got to worry about the extent to which their ego is going to get involved, or perhaps their correctness. They're very attached to being correct instead of being right, or being right instead of being correct. The distinction being, of course, that if you insist you're right, there's a decent chance that you're not correct. But you might be, like I insist I'm right because I am correct. That's not usually the case, though. Interests. So you got to consider the person's interests. Is there something to gain on them? Are ulterior motives involved? Assessment as well. To what extent are they expressing statements not so much as a means of conveying information as assessing how you react to it or something like that? Okay. And then expressions that aren't statements. There's questions, there's commands, there's non-word willful noises, and there's non-word reflexive noises. Questions, and you can see here I put this stuff. What is the effect, if we were to match this communicative stuff up with with cognitive functions, how do they go? More clear and less thorough is NI. More thorough, less clear is NE. More particular claims, more universally inclusive is SI. More universal claims, less universally inclusive is NI. More parsed, says less is TI. Less parsed, say more is FI. Descriptive purposed statements are usually SEFE things. They're used to convey experiences. Prescriptive are usually TESI kind of frame reference things, which is to say they are promoting an action in order to attain some sort of goal or solve a problem. Normative are usually TIFI. In other words, your deliberative functions are either objecting or allowing a given normative consideration to pass muster. And then predictive claims are normally NE and I things. NI or NE is saying, well, maybe the pattern will play out like this or like this or like this. NI is saying, I see the pattern, the future is there. Of course, the thing is, NE is being intuitive about the flexibility of the system that's generating this pattern and how the pattern may be impacted by a variety of factors. So it's a way of predicting, in a way. It's a way of knowing where your predictions, where the limits of your predictions are. And then NI is a way of embracing your predictions as though they weren't necessarily subject to those limits. And having the know without knowing the how. You got there, you know. Okay, so on these illocutionary vectors, the advocacy thing is very much an NENITIFI thing, although it can be SE. You stick SE in there too, because of course SE being an action function, it's more like NESE I should put instead of NI. The NI comes along with the SE, but it's really the SE ones that are the advocates, not the NI ones. Okay, ego, FETE. The reason TE is because status is relevant to effectiveness. Interests, FISI. If you have an interest as an agent, it's like an FI consideration. I know how important or not important this is to me. If you have an interest as from an SI perspective, it's as an object, that's going to hurt, that's going to be uncomfortable, or that's going to feel good. For assessment, TINISIFI, if you are in fact trying to deliberate and know, if you're making statements as a way of assessing another person, that's very TINI as a subject. In other words, you're going to say something, see how they react to it, and know know something about them. If it's SIFI, it's more like an agent, which is you're going to link back to, you're going to experience whatever's happening by linking it back to something that's happened before and then determine how you feel about it. So it's much more agential. And as far as these expressions that aren't statements, questions are usually TIFI as subject. TI people ask a lot of questions. When I'm trying to figure out what's going on with a disagreement between me and somebody else on an idea, I typically ask them a lot of questions to see if they know what they're talking about. And when you try to pin them down, you realize, oh, they don't really know. They're not really saying anything, you know. Commands, but that's for TIFI as subjects. For questions, FE and TE, you're the object. In other words, FETE people ask questions because they either want to encourage the other person to talk and feel comfortable, or because they're trying to find some specific information that will link to a problem. FITI people, when they ask questions, they're trying to determine the legitimacy of what you're saying or who you are. And that's a different thing. Commands, TEFE, command as subjects. TIFI, command as objects. In other words, if I issue a command of some sort, it's because a TIFI person is much more comfortable in the role of deciding whether commands are legitimate. And so to the extent that they do issue them, it's only after they've known about the legitimacy and not because they want to attain particular outcomes. I mean, it may be because they want to attain the outcome of the command, but the legitimacy comes first. They have to be in the right job, in the right role, in the right position, to know that they can justify their own behavior, either according to the general consensus via TI or according to their own sense of what's right and pure and true and just, that vi. Non-word willful noises, things like I guess you'd say, SI, NI is subjects. You're conveying my knowledge of something is either delighting or disgusting me. I'm knowing this thing. I'm knowing that it's delightful or disgusting. The non-word reflexive noises, SE is object. So if I get let's say someone's hurtling towards me, but they're not looking, and I go, ah! Well, I'm the object of that person's SE, and it's causing me to vocalize. SI, NI is objects. So if I'm sliding to the bathroom going, ah, that's a SI non-word reflexive noise. If I go, ah, I just realized something, that's an NI non-word reflexive noise. Okay, so what's the takeaway from all this? The thing is, you could taxonomy these things differently, right? But what you need to do in order to make sure you taxonomy something correctly or well is, first and foremost, you have to figure out what the top level of set is. So if I make a big pile of examples of people paying attention, then I have to see where those examples naturally fit into stacks. It is true that there's a linkage between frequency of needing to breathe and level of activity, right? It's not in any dispute that there's a linkage there, that the higher the level of activity, the more frequently you need to breathe or the more air you need to intake. So, for example, therefore, it's not possible to talk about a breathing type that's high activity, low frequency. To the extent that those things would seem to contradict each other, to the extent that there be a reality that would seem to contradict that, it would be indicative of some type that's split the difference, perhaps, and that, in other words, they're in the fourth and fifth slot, and you're just highlighting a portion of the data that's consistent with the low activity part of their activity, and a portion of the data that's consistent with their high breathing frequency, and saying, see, high breathing frequency and data and activity level aren't linked, or you can't put them in a box. Well, the fact is they are linked, and so, we could change it to heartbeat. Hummingbirds' hearts beat a lot faster than our hearts, which beat faster than, say, an elephant's hearts. Well, is that going to always be the case, that things you can exactly line up activity level with heart rate for every given species? Not precisely, because some species have that vector of biological manifestation in the 4 or 5 slot, right? Which means they're pretty balanced, and it's kind of hard to tell. But nevertheless, it doesn't change the fact that it's a vector in configuring the creature's viability as a species, and it's just not a vector that's especially highlighted in that species. So in the hummingbird, the linkage between heartbeat rate and level of activity and need to consume high calorie food and stuff are all maximally exemplified. And maybe in the sloth, the opposite is maximally identified or exemplified. So it is a vector upon which special viability can be considered, right? And yet it's also the case that that there's going to be some creatures that are non-specialists on that vector. Same is true with cognitive functions. It is the case that recalling details and experiencing your own physical sensations and appreciating those and keeping track of your stuff's going on in the day and such is an attentional manner that is on a pole in which the other end of it really is introverted intuition. So am I knowing from me first? Am I object permanence first? Like, I know the remote's there because I remember leaving it there. Or am I identity first? I know that's I suspect the remote's right by the TV because that's the place where one would put it, you know, or shape consciousness in general is basically the idea that whether I look at it like this or like this, I can still tell what it is. It's still the same thing, right? That is to say, intuition about the identity of things outside of you. So SI and NI are on opposite ends of a pole, but you will find people like me who seem to be quite fluid in both modalities because I have SI and NI in the 4-5. This is what makes cognitive functions kind of tricky, right? Is that if it is in fact the case that I can be both SI and NI, then how can we really say that I'm either? Well, the answer lies in this subject-object-agent thing. So because I'm a subject with extroverted intuition, it means I'm not a subject with introverted intuition. I can either know this pattern and have clarity about that, yes, it is the pattern, or I can doubt this pattern and have clarity about the possible ways in which the pattern might not be true or whatever, but I can't make both my default way of being. So, in other words, while introverted sensing and introverted intuition are on a kind of pole, it's also the case that extroverted intuition and introverted intuition are on a kind of pole, and that that pole is going to be defined by your slot. So when you're talking about the dominant function, you're devoting the majority of your conscious or willful attention towards that strategy, and it comes with strengths that are necessary to be maximally robust with that strategy, and weaknesses that are unavoidable when you choose to invest in that strategy. I can choose to get a car that's very gas mileage efficient. I can maximize that. Or I could maximize responsiveness, the ability to go from 0 to 60 really fast. Assuming we're just talking gasoline-powered cars, forget about electrics or hybrids, I can't do both. In any given car, no matter what, even if I'm trying to attain good results on both vectors, I will have to make a choice. We could make this engine more powerful, but it will make it less gas efficient, or the other way around. In other words, even if I do a great job in both fuel efficiency and responsiveness and power, it is the case that I could have done better in one by sacrificing some of the other. Okay? And that's the key thing about cognitive functions. Because you have shape constancy as well as object permanence, because you are both an identity and an object, it is the case that you're stuck with your configuration. You're stuck with it. You can't do anything about it. It is who you are. Just like you may make modifications to a 68 Mustang, but you're never going to make it into fuel efficient, a maximally fuel efficient and, say, size conscious vehicle without entirely scrapping it and making it into something that's not a Mustang anymore. So, same thing's true with cognitive functions. You're never going to find a sloth that breathes a whole shit ton because they're not designed, they're configurally designed, their strategy is do less, breathe less. With cognitive functions, therefore, you're not going to find an ISTP who does all the work that Eminem has done. Doesn't matter what he seems like in an interview, right? I could show you a bit of footage about a sloth being chased by a predator, being maximally forced to action and breathing hard, and say, see, this is a high activity, high breathing kind of creature. But that would be wrong. And Eminem, equivalently, people mistype him as an ISTP because they look at his behavior in a given interview and they ignore all the actual data that matters, which is the work he does. It's not possible for an ISTP to do that work. It's literally impossible. There's no other way to put it. It's literally impossible for an anypolar person to have generated that many words, that many ideas, that much stuff that requires so much extroverted intuition. Doesn't matter what his affect is in any given interview. Doesn't matter what reasons you provide me. It's impossible for him to be anything other than extroverted intuition in the first or second slot. So this is a rambling video. Probably have to edit it, or I might just put it straight up. I don't know. Thanks for watching. You got to see a rare. If I do just put it straight up, you got to see something very rare. I got pissed off at Rachel and snapped at her. I don't normally do that. So, congratulations if I just put this straight up. You got to see Eric at his least patient. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to eat plenty of cheese.